Mom, we're not coming for Christmas. Daniel's voice was brisk, distracted, like a man ordering coffee instead of dismantling tradition. Mary froze, the phone slick in her palm, her heart stuttering. For weeks she had polished silverware, tucked peppermint bark into stockings, and pictured her grandchildren's feet pounding across the floorboards. Not coming? Her voice cracked, thin with disbelief. But I baked. I set the cranberry bowl on the table. The stockings, Sophie and James loved digging through them. I thought. He said from other side it's just, you really wouldn't enjoy it. Too cold, too much walking. You wouldn't keep up, and we don't want you to feel left out while we're on the slopes. His words are sharp and ready to snap. Mary's throat closed. You mean you planned this without me? Her words tangled and collapsed, the silence on the line pressing against her chest like a weight. Then came the beep of a boarding scanner, the hollow chatter of an airport, and her grandchildren's laughter spilling bright and cruel through the receiver. It cut deeper than the blizzard howling outside her window. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Snow fell the way memories return, slow at first, then all at once. The storm had been building since dawn, pushing drifts against the porch, frosting over the old birdbath, painting the world in white silence. Inside the Ellison house, the silence was louder still. Mary Ellison stood at her living room window, her breath fogging the glass. Once upon a time, Christmas mornings had been chaos here. Frank, her late husband, used to rise early to stoke the fire before Daniel came thundering down the stairs in his pajamas. Daniel's laugh would bounce off the walls as he tore into wrapping paper, shouting, "Mom, look! Dad, look!" Later, after Frank's passing, Christmas had become quieter, yes, but still full. Daniel's wife Lindsay with her camera in hand, insisting on group photos. The children, Sophie and James, racing across the room, leaving snowy boot prints on her braided rug. She could almost hear them now, their voices echoing in her memory. "Grandma, did Santa find us here too?" But this morning, the house was barren of voices, only the heater groaning and the clock ticking in its hollow rhythm. Mary pressed a hand to the cranberry glass bowl on the table, filled with clove-studded oranges, polished until it gleamed. Stockings hung by the fireplace, peppermint bark wrapped in wax paper, cinnamon rolls rising on the counter. She had set the stage for family. The family never came. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Daniel. Relief swelled, he was running late, maybe, but on the way. She answered quickly, too quickly. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," she said, her voice already trembling with warmth. Daniel's reply was flat, rehearsed. "Mom, listen. We're not coming this year." Mary froze, hand gripping the edge of the counter. "Not coming? The roads are bad, I know, but, tomorrow then? The kids." "Mom," he cut in. A muffled boarding announcement echoed behind him. "We're flying out. Aspen. The kids wanted to ski. Lindsay booked it weeks ago." His pause was brief, almost perfunctory. "It's just, you really wouldn't enjoy it. Too cold, too much walking. You wouldn't keep up, and we don't want you to feel left out while we're on the slopes." His words hung like icicles, sharp and ready to snap. Mary's throat closed. "You mean you planned this without me?" Her voice cracked, betraying the tears already stinging her eyes. "Daniel, I baked. I set the table. I filled the stockings." She swallowed hard. "I thought, after everything, that we'd have one Christmas. Just one more like the old days." In the background, she heard her granddaughter Sophie squeal with laughter, her grandson shouting about snowboards. The sounds cut deeper than the words. "Mom," Daniel said softly, as if that gentleness could make up for the cruelty. Don't do this. We'll call later. It's not like we're abandoning you. But it felt exactly like abandonment. Mary pressed the phone hard to her ear, tears slipping down her cheeks. Your father is gone. You are all I have left. And now you're leaving me too. Her voice broke into a sob. There was silence, then his hurried voice. We'll celebrate when we get back, okay? I promise. I've got to go, they're boarding. Love you. The line went dead. Mary stood frozen in the kitchen, the phone cold in her hand. The cinnamon rolls rose on the counter, unneeded. The cranberry bowl gleamed for no one. The stockings sagged above the fire, waiting for small hands that would never come. Her body shook with sobs she couldn't suppress, the storm outside seeming to echo her grief, rattling the windows like the house itself was crying. Finally, she pulled on Frank's parka, still smelling faintly of cedar and wintergreen. She gathered the trash, her breath ragged, and stepped into the storm. Snow clawed at her coat, whipped into her hair, stung her cheeks. She dragged the bag to the curb, muttering bitterly, "Merry Christmas, Mary." The wind ripped the lid from the trash can, slamming it against the siding with a bang. She gave a hollow laugh. All right, she told the storm. Then her boot slipped. Ice had filmed over the step, invisible beneath the snow. Her foot shot forward, her arms flailed, the trash bag flying from her hand. She thought wildly, so this is how I break the good hip. The step's edge smashed into her temple. A white explosion. The sky spun overhead. She landed hard in the drift, snow piling around her body like a shroud. Her breath rose in frantic clouds, then faltered. Up, she whispered weakly, but her arms would not answer. Her vision narrowed, dimming into shadow. The storm held on, steady, merciless. A robin called somewhere distant, absurdly cheerful. Her lips parted, a final gasp escaping. And then everything went black. Cold. That was all she felt at first. It clung to her skin, sank into her bones, pressed her deeper into the snow until she couldn't tell where her body ended and the drift began. Somewhere in the storm, she thought she heard Frank's voice calling her, but it was only the wind. By morning, she was almost buried. Mary! Her neighbor Carl's shout cut across the yard. He dropped his shovel, ran to her, and brushed snow from her face with frantic hands. Dear God, hang on. His voice shook as he fumbled for his phone. We'll get you out of this. Mary's eyes fluttered. She wanted to answer, to thank him, but the world slid sideways again into black. When she woke, the ceiling was white and sterile, the air sharp with antiseptic. A monitor beeped steadily at her side. A nurse adjusted her 4-line and smiled gently. You're safe. You had a bad fall, but your neighbor found you just in time. Mary blinked slowly. Her head throbbed, her lips dry. She turned her face toward the chart at the foot of her bed. A box stared back at her in bold letters, emergency contact, none listed. The nurse followed her gaze, lips pressing together. We tried calling your son, she said softly. We reached him. Mary's heart lurched. And? The nurse hesitated, then sighed. He said he couldn't interrupt his trip. That you'd be fine on your own. That he'd check in when he got back. Mary closed her eyes. The words dropped heavy inside her chest, each one echoing, fine on your own. Fine on your own. The nurse's hand brushed her arm gently. I'm sorry. I know that's not what you wanted to hear. Mary turned her face toward the window. Snow blurred the glass, the storm still raging beyond. She thought of the years, scrubbing floors after Frank died, putting Daniel through school, working herself raw so he could have more than she ever did. She had been there for scraped knees, broken hearts, report cards, and job interviews. And when she needed him, just one morning, one Christmas, he told the hospital she would be fine on her own. Her throat tightened, but she refused to let the tears fall. A new thought steadied her: maybe I will be fine on my own. Just not in the way he thinks. She drew in a slow, shallow breath, then turned back to the nurse. Her voice was calm now, almost cold in its clarity. Can someone help me sell a house? The house was quieter than ever when Mary returned from the hospital 2 days later. Carl had shoveled the walk for her, leaving a clean path to the porch, but the silence inside was untouched. No children's laughter, no hum of family chatter, just the tick of the old clock and the sigh of radiators groaning against the cold. Mary lowered herself carefully into her armchair, the parka Frank once wore still draped across its back. Her head ached faintly, the bruise tender near her temple, but the real ache lived deeper, somewhere between her ribs. The nurse's words kept circling in her mind: he said you'd be fine on your own. Her own son. Her eyes wandered across the living room, the stockings she hadn't taken down, the cranberry glass bowl polished until it gleamed, the peppermint bark wrapped carefully in wax paper. All of it prepared for a family that had decided she didn't belong. Her gaze sharpened. Fine on your own, he'd said. Then fine, she thought. Truly fine. She reached for the phone. The real estate lawyer's office smelled faintly of paper and polish when she walked in later that week. The receptionist, young enough to be her granddaughter, gave her a polite smile and guided her into a small office lined with mahogany shelves. "Mrs. Ellison," said Mr. Garner, the lawyer, rising to shake her hand. He was in his 50s, with the tidy calm of a man who lived by documents. "What can I do for you today?" Mary settled into the chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her voice was steady, almost clinical. "I'd like to discuss selling a house." Garner nodded, taking notes. "Yours?" Her lips tightened. "My son believes it's his." His brows lifted slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "Do you have the deed?" Mary opened her handbag, pulled out a carefully folded envelope, and handed it across the desk. She had kept it locked away for years, almost forgetting it existed. Garner smoothed it flat, scanning the pages with a trained eye. After a moment, he looked up. "Mrs. Ellison, your name is the only one listed here. This property was never transferred." Mary exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening in her lap. "So legally?" "Legally," Garner confirmed, "it's yours. Entirely. You have every right to sell it." Her chest ached with a strange mix of grief and satisfaction. She thought of Daniel's smug tone when he told her she'd be fine on her own. He had left her out of his life, but he had forgotten whose name held the power. Memories tugged at her, nights spent alone with the feverish Daniel, Frank already gone, her hands trembling as she pressed cool cloths against her son's forehead. The overtime shifts she worked to buy him shoes that wouldn't fall apart. Every sacrifice etched into her bones. And now, the same son had chosen a ski trip over her. Had told a hospital she could fend for herself. Mary straightened her back. "Put it on the market," she said, her voice low but clear. "And list it aggressively." Garner studied her, as though expecting hesitation. But Mary's eyes were firm, her jaw set. "This isn't revenge," she added. "This is accuracy." He nodded once. "Understood. I'll begin the paperwork." That night, Mary sat at her dining table, papers spread out before her, pen in hand. The lamp cast a golden circle of light over the documents, leaving the rest of the room in shadow. She signed each page deliberately, her hand steady despite the tremor of emotion in her chest. Every signature felt like a small release, a loosening of the old chains of expectation and guilt. For decades, she had bent herself into the shape of a mother who waited, who forgave, who hoped. Tonight, she was a woman reclaiming her life. When the last line was signed, she leaned back in her chair. The house creaked around her, the storm tapping faintly against the window. For the first time in years, the silence felt less like a wound and more like a beginning. The for sale sign went up 2 days after the papers were filed. Snow still blanketed the lawn, glittering beneath the pale December sun, but the bright red letters stood out like a declaration, available. Mary watched from the living room window as the realtor hammered the post into frozen ground. Her breath fogged the glass, her hand resting against the frame. For years, she had imagined this house as Daniel's inheritance, a legacy of her love. Now, the sight of the sign filled her not with sorrow, but with a grim satisfaction. That evening, the realtor, a brisk woman named Evelyn, called. "You weren't kidding when you said listed aggressively. We've already had 3 showings booked. It's a prime property. I think you'll be surprised how quickly it moves." Mary murmured her thanks, hung up, and sat in silence. The cranberry bowl gleamed on the table, still full of oranges she no longer cared to smell. She thought of Daniel's voice on the phone, steady and dismissive. "You'd feel left out. Stay comfortable at home." She had stayed at home. Now the home itself would go. Within a week, the offers began. Evelyn spread the folders across Mary's dining table, each packet tidy, professional, full of numbers that made her head spin. "First one came in at 1.7 million, Evelyn said briskly. Then 1.9. And here's the latest." She slid the last packet forward. 2.1 million. Cash buyer. They're eager. Mary stared at the figure. Her breath caught, not because of greed, but because of what it represented. Stability. Options. Freedom. Still, guilt pressed against her ribs like a persistent hand. A voice in her head whispered, "A mother doesn't do this. A mother doesn't sell the house her son lives in. A mother forgives." But another voice rose louder, sharper. "And what did being a mother get you? A call that left you alone on Christmas. A son who told the hospital you'd be fine on your own." Her hand trembled as she touched the packet. Evelyn was watching her, pen in hand, ready to record the decision. "You don't have to decide this second," the realtor said gently. "But I'd be lying if I didn't say, it's an excellent offer." Mary exhaled slowly. She thought of Frank, of the sacrifices she had made, of the woman she used to be, the one who gave everything and asked for nothing. That woman had been abandoned in the snow. The woman sitting at this table was different. She lifted her chin. "Accept it." Evelyn's pen scratched quickly across the page. "Done. Congratulations, Mrs. Ellison. That's a life-changing sale." Mary leaned back, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Her heartbeat thudded heavy in her chest, but her voice was steady. "Not life-changing," she corrected softly. "Life-claiming." That night, alone in the quiet house, Mary walked room to room. She touched the walls, the stair rail polished by years of hands, the window where Daniel once taped his paper star, for MOM, a warm door. She didn't cry. She didn't plead with the past. She simply let the memories stand where they were, like old furniture she no longer needed to carry. In the kitchen, she looked down at her reflection in the window, lined, tired, but steadier than it had been in years. She whispered into the glass, "I choose me." Outside, the for sale sign caught the moonlight, gleaming white against the snow. Aspen looked like another planet. At least, that's how it appeared from the glossy Facebook posts Mary scrolled through on her phone late one night. There was Daniel in a hot tub, steam curling around him, a champagne flute raised. Lindsay, wrapped in a designer coat, grinning wide for the camera. Sophie and James, beaming, their cheeks pink from the slopes, posing with snowboards bigger than they were. The captions were as bright as the photos, "Family Christmas in the mountains." Couldn't ask for more. Mary stared at the screen until her eyes blurred. She set the phone down on the counter with a deliberate calm, though her chest burned. He could post to hundreds of strangers, but not one message to her. Not one. She rose from the chair, pulled Frank's old sweater around her shoulders, and walked into the living room. The movers were scheduled for the morning, but she had decided to start early. The air in the house was heavy with the scent of cedar from the boxes she'd lined up. She opened Daniel's closet first. Shirts, jackets, folded sweaters, all of it smelled faintly of him, though she realized with a start that she hadn't hugged her son in months. She lifted each item, folded it carefully, placed it in a box. She wasn't careless. She wasn't cruel. She was thorough. In the bottom drawer, she found a shoebox. Inside, a scatter of old cards, crayon drawings from his children, a handful of Father's Day notes. She shuffled through them, pausing when she spotted one of her own, a Mother's Day card Daniel had given her when he was 12. "To Mom, my hero." Her hands shook. She pressed the card to her chest for a long moment, then set it aside gently. That boy was gone. The man he became had chosen Aspen. The house grew emptier as she worked. Picture frames were wrapped in paper. Towels folded into boxes. Toys bagged neatly. She moved room to room like a quiet storm, steady and relentless. Every so often, she caught sight of something she couldn't ignore: the dining table, where birthdays had been celebrated, the hallway wall, still marked faintly where Sophie had drawn with crayons during one visit. Her heart clenched, but she didn't stop. By morning, the movers arrived. They were efficient, respectful, silent as they carried boxes out the door. Mary gave instructions in her even voice, her hands clasped behind her back, the parka belted tight. "Everything to storage," she said. "All of it. Keep the fragile boxes separate." When the truck finally rumbled away, the house was stripped bare. No clothes in the closets, no toys in the corners, no laughter in the walls. Just Mary and the echo of her own footsteps. She stood in the center of the living room, the emptiness pressing around her, and exhaled. For once, the silence didn't feel suffocating. It felt hers. That afternoon, Evelyn the realtor called with the final word. "It's official. The house has closed. Funds are transferred." Mary listened quietly as the details rolled out. $2.1 million. Already wired into her account. The end of one chapter, the start of another. When the call ended, she sat at her dining table, bare now, stripped of linens and bowls. She opened a fresh folder, labeled it in her own looping handwriting, "The Mary Fund." Inside, she tucked the confirmation papers, her lips curving in the faintest smile. This wasn't spite. It wasn't revenge. It was structure, protection, possibility. For the first time in decades, her life was hers alone to shape. The wheels of Daniel's SUV crunched into the driveway, tires spitting up slush from the storm that had buried Vermont days earlier. The kids were bickering in the back seat, their ski jackets half-zipped, goggles still dangling around their necks like trophies. Finally, Lindsay sighed, stretching in her seat. Nothing like home after a week of hotel beds. Daniel smiled, tired but smug, as he clicked the garage opener. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. Still nothing. "That's weird," he muttered. "Must be the batteries." He pulled into the driveway instead, the kids already unbuckling, eager to get inside. But as he parked, his smile faltered. The garage door was a different color. The trim freshly painted. A new light fixture glowed above the porch. Dad? Sophie frowned. Why does the house look different? Before Daniel could answer, the front door swung open. A man stepped out, broad-shouldered, in a flannel shirt, carrying a box marked kitchen. Behind him, a woman appeared, holding a mug of coffee, laughing at something inside. Daniel froze. What the hell? The man glanced at the SUV, then raised a hand politely. Hey there. Can I help you? Lindsay's hand flew to her mouth. The kids stared, wide-eyed. Daniel stumbled out of the car, his boots slipping on the icy pavement. This is my house. What are you doing here? The man looked genuinely confused. Your house? We closed on it last week. We just moved in yesterday. He stepped onto the porch, pulling a folded deed from his pocket. It's ours now. The words rang in the cold air like a gavel. Daniel's face drained of color. He spun toward his wife, then back to the strangers filling the doorway of what had been his home. His voice cracked with disbelief. This isn't possible. This is my mother's. He stopped himself, realization dawning. No, she wouldn't. His phone was already in his hand, fingers trembling as he pressed call. The ring stretched out, unbearable, until finally. Hello? Mary's voice, calm, steady. Daniel nearly shouted into the receiver. Mom. There are strangers in the house. Our house. What did you do? There was a pause. Then her voice, even and almost amused. Oh, you're back? His breath caught. Back? Mom, this is insane. Where are our things? Storage, Mary said. I'll text you the address. Her voice was level, like someone confirming a grocery list. Daniel's face burned. His kids were staring at him, confused, frightened. His wife's eyes were wide with accusation. Strangers laughed faintly in the background as they carried more boxes inside. Mom, he hissed, lowering his voice, you can't do this. But Mary only replied, I already have. The line went dead. Daniel stood in the driveway, phone limp in his hand, the cold biting his cheeks. Behind him, his children whispered nervously. Lindsay crossed her arms, her voice sharp as glass. What just happened? Daniel swallowed hard. We don't live here anymore. The words tasted like ash. Daniel was livid. By the time they reached the motel on the edge of town, he was shaking with rage. His wife hadn't spoken a word since the confrontation at the house, her silence sharp as glass. The kids sat hunched on the bed in the room they'd checked into, whispering nervously, too afraid to ask what had just happened. Daniel paced the floor, phone in hand, his face flushed. She sold it out from under us. Can you believe this? My own mother. Lindsay finally snapped. How could she? How could you let her? You said the house was secure, that it was ours. Daniel flinched at the bite in her tone. It was. It should have been. She never transferred the deed. Never transferred the. Lindsay cut herself off, eyes narrowing. You mean legally, it was still hers? Daniel faltered. His throat went dry. I just thought. You thought? Her voice rose, brittle with disbelief. You dragged us back here with nothing but ski gear and carry-ons, and now we're homeless because you thought? Daniel's ears burned. He couldn't bear the look in her eyes, half fury, half humiliation. He dropped onto the chair by the nightstand, thumb hovering over his phone. I'll show them, he muttered. I'll show everyone what she's done. That night, his Facebook post went live. Imagine this, you trust your mother, you build your life around the family home, and while you're away for Christmas, she sells it right out from under you. We came back to strangers living in our house. Our things stuffed into storage like garbage. Betrayal doesn't even cover it. Hashtag family first hashtag betrayal. He hit post with a trembling finger, his heart pounding with righteous anger. Within minutes, the notifications lit up his screen. Dozens of likes. Then hundreds. Comments streaming in. Daniel leaned back, convinced he'd found vindication. But as he scrolled, his stomach tightened. Wait, so it was her house legally, right? Doesn't sound like betrayal to me. Bro, your mom's 74 and spent Christmas alone? You went skiing? And your mad SHE sold her house? Yikes. Sounds like she set boundaries and you didn't like it. Queen behavior. Honestly? Iconic. Protect Mary at all costs. Meme pages picked it up within hours. A picture of a crowned queen sitting on a throne, captioned, Mary after evicting her ungrateful son. A screenshot of Daniel's post with comments reading, You abandoned her first, king. Actions have consequences. By morning, his story had gone viral, for all the wrong reasons. At her own kitchen table, Mary stared at her phone in disbelief. Dozens of messages lit up her notifications. She didn't have a Facebook account anymore, but screenshots had been texted to her by Carl, the neighbor, and 2 women from her church. You've gone viral, Carl said when he called, half amused. Everyone's siding with you. They're calling you Grandma Justice. Mary chuckled softly, though her chest tightened. Grandma Justice? Oh dear. But as she scrolled through the screenshots, a strange warmth stirred inside her. Strangers, people she would never meet, were defending her. Applauding her for taking back control of her life. Words she had never thought she'd hear applied to herself, brave, inspiring, queen. Her son's fury had made her a symbol. Later that evening, a new email arrived. The subject line, podcast interview request. Mrs. Ellison, your story has touched millions online. We'd be honored if you joined us to share your perspective. We believe people need to hear your side, in your words. Mary stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. She had never spoken into a microphone in her life. But something inside her whispered, this is more than your story now. This is your chance to own it. She closed the laptop, her lips curving faintly. For 74 years, she had been quiet, patient, forgiving. Perhaps it was time to speak. Mary hadn't slept well the night before the interview. Her nerves had kept her tossing beneath the quilt, every creak of the old house reminding her she was alone. She had almost written the podcast host an email to cancel. After all, what business did a 74-year-old widow have talking to the world? But when morning came, she brewed her tea, smoothed her cardigan, and sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open. The storm outside had calmed, sunlight spilling across the snow, as though the world itself had decided to listen. The host's face appeared on the screen, young, eager, polite. Mrs. Ellison, thank you so much for being here. I know this must be difficult. Mary folded her hands in her lap, her voice steady but quiet. It's not difficult to speak the truth. They began with simple questions, her age, her life in Vermont, her memories of Christmases past. But soon the host leaned forward, his tone softer. The internet has seen your son's version. We'd like to hear yours. What happened? Mary took a slow breath. Her chest trembled, but her eyes stayed steady on the camera. My son called me on Christmas morning, she began. He told me they weren't coming. They were flying to Aspen. He said I wouldn't keep up. That I'd feel left out. He told the hospital I would be fine on my own. Her voice caught, but she pressed on. And in that moment, I realized he was right. I would be fine on my own. Not because he said so, but because I chose to be. The host nodded, his expression solemn. That must have been painful. Mary's lips trembled, but she lifted her chin. I gave him life. He gave me loneliness. I decided I would not carry that bargain any longer. I sold the house. I started the Mary Fund. And for the first time in my life, I am building something just for me. Silence filled the moment after she spoke, a silence that wasn't empty but reverent. The host cleared his throat. That's powerful. I think people will really feel that. Mary gave a faint smile. I don't need people to feel it. I need people to know it's possible. The episode aired 2 days later. Within hours, clips of Mary's voice spread across social media. A gray-haired woman in a cardigan, speaking softly into a microphone, became an unlikely icon. Quotes from her interview appeared everywhere. I gave him life. He gave me loneliness. This isn't revenge. This is accuracy. I chose me. Comment sections filled with strangers pouring out their own stories, parents forgotten by adult children, women who had spent lifetimes giving without receiving, people who had chosen boundaries over blood. Talk shows reached out. News anchors debated her choices. Book agents sent emails with $signs attached. A television producer offered to option her story for a limited series. Mary watched it all from her kitchen table, tea in hand, the phone buzzing constantly beside her. The world had taken her pain and turned it into something she hadn't expected, validation. Still, she didn't let it sweep her away. Each time she declined an interview that felt too sensational, she reminded herself, this isn't about fame. It's about freedom. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the last light painted the snow in shades of gold, there was a knock at her door. Mary frowned, rising slowly. She wasn't expecting Carl or the realtor, and most visitors called first. When she opened the door, Daniel stood there. His eyes were red, his face pale, his posture deflated. Behind him, the wind caught his scarf, whipping it around his neck. Mom, he said, his voice hoarse. We need to talk. Daniel stood on the porch like a man caught in the wrong season. His hair was mussed, his coat wrinkled, his face haggard. Mary had expected anger in his eyes, maybe even arrogance, but what she saw instead was a kind of desperation, raw, jagged, unmasked. Mom, he rasped, as though he had walked miles through snow to get here. We need to talk. Mary tightened her grip on the doorframe. The instinct to let him in, to offer warmth and soup and forgiveness, rose quickly, but she caught it, held it down. That instinct had nearly killed her. Instead, she opened the door just enough for him to enter, then closed it firmly behind him. He stood in the foyer, shifting from foot to foot, looking around the house as though it were foreign territory. This place feels so different, he muttered. Mary crossed her arms. It's mine again. That's why. His head snapped toward her. Why would you do this? Why would you humiliate me? My kids, my wife, we had no place to go. Do you know what you've done to us? Her laugh was low, bitter. Do you know what you've done to me? He flinched. Mary took a step closer, her voice sharpening. You left me on Christmas, Daniel. You told me I wouldn't belong. That I'd only slow you down. And when the hospital called after I hit my head on the ice, do you know what you said? Her eyes burned. You said I'd be fine on my own. That you'd check in later. Daniel opened his mouth, but nothing came out. She pressed on, decades spilling out in a tide she could no longer hold back. Do you remember my 50th birthday? You didn't call. Do you remember when I had that lump in my breast? I told you, and you said you were too busy to visit. Do you remember your children's birthdays, when I begged you to come so we could be together as a family? You brushed me off every time. Do you know what it feels like to raise a boy alone, to sacrifice everything, and then be told you're inconvenient? Her voice broke on the last word. Daniel's eyes brimmed with tears. He reached for her arm, but she stepped back. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't realize. Mary shook her head fiercely. No, Daniel. You realized. You just didn't care enough to act. The silence between them was heavy, a canyon filled with years of unspoken truths. Finally, she steadied herself, her voice quiet but sharp as glass. I have one last thing to give you. Come tomorrow. Daniel blinked, startled. What do you mean? Tomorrow, she repeated, her gaze unyielding. You'll see. Daniel arrived the next afternoon looking worn, almost fragile. He carried no arrogance this time, no hurried excuses. Just exhaustion, his eyes rimmed red as if sleep had eluded him. Mary had already set the stage. The kitchen table was bare but for two items, a folded envelope, yellowed at the edges, and a manila folder labeled in her neat handwriting, the Mary Fund. She gestured to the chair across from her. Sit. Daniel obeyed, sinking into the seat like a schoolboy bracing for discipline. His gaze fell immediately to the envelope. Mary slid it toward him. This was written by your father. He left it for you. I never gave it to you because I thought the right time would come. Now I see this is the only time. Daniel's hand shook as he picked it up. The paper crackled softly as he opened it, his father's handwriting slanting across the page in faded blue ink. Daniel. If you're reading this, I'm no longer there to say these words myself. I want you to know that a man is measured not by what he takes, but by what he gives, and who he shows up for. Family isn't a place you visit when it's easy. Family is the people you choose to stay beside, even when it's hard. Your mother will give everything she has for you. Don't let her carry the weight alone. Learn to stand beside her, not behind her. Learn to show up. Daniel's breath hitched. His eyes blurred as he whispered the last line aloud. Learn to show up. He folded the letter slowly, his chest heaving with quiet sobs. Mary watched him, her own heart tightening, but she didn't move to comfort him. Not this time. Instead, she tapped the manila folder on the table. This, she said, is what I built with the sale of the house. It's called the Mary Fund. It's for me, my health, my travels, my art. And yes, I've earmarked a portion for something else. Not for you. Not for Lindsay. For the Community Art Center, so women my age can find their voices long after their families stop listening. Daniel looked up, stunned. You made a trust for yourself? Mary's lips curved faintly. For the first time in my life, yes. For myself. Because after 74 years, I've realized no one else is going to do it for me. He swallowed hard, guilt pooling in his expression. So I get nothing? Mary's eyes softened, but her voice remained firm. You had everything, Daniel. You had a childhood built on my sacrifices. You had a home, clothes, education, a mother who stood by you when no one else did. What you do with that foundation is your choice. But no, you don't get this. I've given enough. He bowed his head, shoulders shaking, the letter from his father clutched in his hand. Mary reached across the table, not to touch him, but to set the boundary clearly. She nodded toward the folded page, still has time to learn what love looks like. You already had your chance. Daniel closed his eyes. A tear slid down his cheek and fell onto the table, soaking into the wood grain. For 2 days after reading his father's letter, Daniel stayed quiet. No calls. No texts. Mary half expected him to vanish again, the way he always had when responsibility pressed too close. But on the third evening, there was another knock at her door. Daniel stood there in the cold, scarf loose, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. His eyes looked older, heavier, as though the letter's weight hadn't left his chest. "Mom," he said softly, almost pleading. "I don't want this to be the end. I know I've hurt you. God, I know. But I want to fix it. I want us to be a family again." Mary studied him. The boy she had raised flickered behind those tired eyes, the boy who once taped a paper star to the glass door just to keep her warm. But too many winters had passed since then. "Wanting," she said evenly, "isn't enough. I've heard your words, Daniel. I need to see action." He nodded quickly, desperate. "Anything. Tell me what to do." Mary's hand tightened on the doorframe, but her voice remained calm. "One thing. One test. Come with me to therapy. Sit in a room, listen, speak truthfully. 1 hour. Show me you can be present. Just once." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "Therapy?" "Yes," Mary said firmly. "If you can't sit in a chair beside me for an hour, if you can't give me that, then you'll never give me more." For a long moment, Daniel stared at her, breath fogging in the night air. Then he nodded, slow but certain. "Okay. I'll be there." The appointment was set for Friday. Mary arrived 10 minutes early, her heart thudding nervously as she sat in the waiting room. The space was warm, softly lit, with magazines fanned across a coffee table and the faint hum of a heater in the corner. She smoothed her skirt, crossed and uncrossed her legs, and tried not to watch the clock. The second hand ticked past 1 p.m., the hour of their appointment. Mary inhaled. "He's just running late," she told herself. "He'll come. 5 minutes. 10. The door didn't open. By 1:15, her chest was tight. At 1:20, the therapist peeked into the waiting room, offering a sympathetic smile. "Still waiting?" Mary nodded, her lips pressed tight. "Yes." At 1:30, the clock's hands seemed to mock her. She sat very still, her eyes fixed on the door, her heart straining toward the sound of every car that passed outside. But Daniel never appeared. Her chest ached as she rose from the chair. "He's not coming," she said quietly. The therapist's eyes softened. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ellison." Mary gave a small, bitter laugh. "Don't be. I think I already knew." She walked out into the cold afternoon, the winter air sharp against her cheeks. The sky above was pale blue, deceptively gentle. For the first time, she didn't cry. Instead, she whispered into the wind, "Some winters never thaw." The silence in the car on the way home from the therapist's office was different this time. It wasn't the silence of grief, raw and hollow. It was the silence of recognition, a truth settling so deep it could no longer be denied. Mary drove slowly down the winding Vermont roads, snow piled in soft ridges on either side. Her hands were steady on the wheel, though her chest still burned with disappointment. At 74, she thought she had run out of tears, and today proved her right. She had none left for Daniel. When she stepped into her house, the first thing she did was set her phone on the table. The screen lit up, blank of new messages. Not even an apology. Not even an excuse. She scrolled through her contacts until she reached his name, Daniel. For years, she had kept it there like a lifeline, believing that no matter how far he drifted, the connection would remain. Now, the sight of it felt like a chain. Her thumb hovered over the option, delete contact. Her breath caught for just a moment, then she pressed. Gone. The silence that followed wasn't empty, It was clean. That evening, she opened her laptop. Her search history from the past few weeks was a timeline of hesitation: cheap vacations for seniors, is 74 too old for cruises, beginner art classes near me. She clicked the cruise ad she'd bookmarked but never dared to open. A picture filled her screen: turquoise waters, white sand, a gleaming ship slicing through the waves. The tagline read, "It's never too late to see the world." Mary's lips curved faintly. "No, it isn't," she murmured. She booked it. 7 days, departing from Boston in 2 months. A cabin with a balcony. Paid in full from the Mary Fund. When the confirmation email chimed, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: anticipation. The next day, she cleared space in her bedroom closet. Out went the sweaters Daniel had given her years ago, the ones she never wore. Out went the dusty boxes of keepsakes she'd been too guilty to part with. In their place, she tucked a sketchpad, charcoal pencils, and a new set of paints she'd ordered impulsively that morning. By evening, she stood before the blank page of her sketchbook, pencil trembling lightly in her hand. For a moment, she felt foolish, 74, chasing something new. But then her hand moved, sketching the curve of a shoreline, a ship's silhouette against the horizon. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. Later that week, she made another decision. She bought herself a new mattress, firm, supportive, the kind she'd always said was too expensive. The delivery man asked where to set it up, and she laughed. "Anywhere it fits," she said. "This one's mine." That night, as she lay in bed, the storm outside tapped gently at the window. She pulled the quilt tight around her shoulders and whispered into the dark, "This time, I'm not waiting." The following morning, a postcard slipped through her mail slot. Bright and cheerful, with a picture of Aspen's snowy mountains. On the back, in clumsy, looping handwriting, were just a few words. "Grandma, I want to visit. Just me. Sophie." Mary held the card in her trembling hands, her breath catching. The ache of Daniel's betrayal still lingered, but the sight of her granddaughter's message sparked something new, a warmth that pressed against the cold edges of her heart. The knock was tentative, almost shy. 3 soft raps against the wooden door, barely audible over the hum of the heater. Mary's heart leapt anyway. She smoothed her cardigan, tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, and opened the door. There she was, Sophie. 14 now, taller than Mary remembered, her long hair tucked beneath a wool hat, a backpack slung over one shoulder. Snow clung to her boots. Her eyes, wide and uncertain, searched Mary's face as if for permission. "Grandma," Sophie whispered. Mary swallowed hard. "Come in, sweetheart. Come in out of the cold." Sophie stepped inside, stamping snow from her boots. For a moment, they simply stood there, studying each other. So much time had passed between visits, so many silences where there should have been laughter. Finally, Sophie spoke. "I wanted to come by myself. Dad doesn't know I wrote you." Mary's chest tightened. She reached out, hesitated, then pulled her granddaughter into a gentle embrace. Sophie stiffened for a second, then melted into it, her arms clutching Mary's waist. "I'm glad you're here," Mary said softly into her hair. "So glad." The week unfolded like a gift Mary hadn't dared to hope for. They baked cookies together, the kitchen filled with the scent of sugar and cinnamon. Sophie leaned on the counter, sneaking chocolate chips from the bowl, and Mary swatted her hand just like she once had Daniel's. The laughter that followed was light, unguarded. They painted side by side at the dining table, brushes dipping into jars of color. Sophie painted bold, messy strokes, Mary sketched carefully, her hand steadier than she expected. "You're good," Sophie said, eyeing Mary's work. Mary smiled. "I'm learning. At my age, that's a victory." Sophie giggled. When I grow up, I want to be just like you. Mary's brush froze on the page. Her eyes blurred with sudden tears, and she set the brush down carefully. No one had said words like that to her in years. She reached across the table, squeezing Sophie's paint-smudged hand. Then you'll be brave, Mary said softly. And you'll always know your worth. On the last night of Sophie's visit, snow fell thick and soft outside, blanketing the yard. Mary watched from the window as Sophie bundled herself in a blanket on the couch, cocoa in hand, eyes glued to a Christmas movie. The house was full again, not with obligation, not with noise, but with warmth. With laughter that rang true. With the sound of new footsteps carving their way across the snow. Mary sat beside her granddaughter, resting her hand gently over Sophie's. For the first time in decades, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt chosen. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of leather and lemon polish, the kind of scent that made decisions feel weighty. Mary sat straight-backed across from Mr. Garner, the same lawyer who had handled the sale of Daniel's house. This time, she had come not to end something, but to define what would remain. I'd like to update my will, she said firmly, sliding a folder across the polished desk. Inside were neat lists she had typed herself, bank accounts, possessions, the details of the Mary Fund. Mr. Garner adjusted his glasses, scanning. Of course. And how would you like your estate distributed? Mary clasped her hands in her lap. She had practiced this sentence in her head for weeks, smoothing it over until it felt less like cruelty and more like truth. Everything goes into the Mary Fund. It's for my lifetime care and pursuits. After I'm gone, it passes entirely to the Community Arts Center and to the Elder Arts grant I've established. She paused, her chin lifting slightly. None of it goes to my son. The lawyer's brows rose, but he didn't question her. And you're certain about that? Yes, Mary said. Her voice was calm, steady. This isn't punishment. This is accuracy. He's chosen his life without me. My legacy will reflect that reality. Garner nodded, pen scratching briskly as he drafted the clauses. Mary's thoughts drifted to Sophie. Her sweet laugh in the kitchen, the paint smudges on her hands, the whispered promise that she wanted to be just like her grandmother. That was legacy enough. Sophie didn't need her money, she needed her example. For years, Mary had believed she owed Daniel everything, her sacrifices, her patience, her forgiveness. Today, she understood the truth, she owed him nothing but honesty. And honesty demanded she stop pretending he had earned a place in her future. 2 weeks later, a courier delivered the papers to Daniel. The envelope was slim, formal, stamped with the lawyer's seal. Inside was a single-page notice, crisp and unambiguous. Daniel Ellison has no legal claim to the estate of Mary Ellison. The estate is secured within an irrevocable trust, fully shielded from contestation. Daniel stood in the motel lobby where the letter had reached him, his hands shaking as he read the words. His face flushed red, then drained pale. Lindsay watched him from across the room, arms folded, her expression unreadable. He crumpled the letter in his fist, his voice breaking. She left me nothing. Not a cent. Behind the desk, the clerk raised an eyebrow. Daniel stormed outside into the cold, his breath fogging in the air. For the first time in his life, he had nothing left to lean on but himself. Back in her house, Mary poured herself a glass of wine. She settled into her armchair, quilt draped across her lap, and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for decades. The weight of guilt had slid off her shoulders and stayed off. The phone buzzed with a new email. She adjusted her glasses and read the subject line aloud, amused disbelief in her tone. Congratulations! You've been nominated for Vermont Woman of the Year. Mary chuckled softly, shaking her head. Me? She sipped her wine, the glass trembling faintly in her hand. Well. Why not me? Snow fell gently outside Mary's window, a quieter storm than the one that had nearly taken her life a year ago. This time, the wind was not a howl but a whisper, brushing the glass like a friendly hand. Inside, the house glowed. Candles flickered in the windows. The dining table, no longer set for absentees, brimmed with dishes she'd chosen herself, roasted vegetables, her mother's cranberry cake, mulled cider steeping with cloves. But it wasn't just food that filled the space. It was voices. Around the table sat people she had gathered into her life deliberately: Carl, her neighbor, who had saved her from the snow. 2 women from the art center, their laughter spilling like bells. Sophie, curled on the couch with a mug of cocoa, humming along to the carols on the radio. Even a shy young student from her painting class, who had nowhere else to go for the holiday, sat wide-eyed at the feast. Mary moved among them with ease, a hostess in her element. She poured cider, passed plates, laughed at jokes that rang genuine. For the first time in decades, the house felt not like an echo but like a chorus. At one point, Sophie slipped her hand into Mary's. "Grandma, this is the best Christmas I've ever had." Mary's throat tightened. She kissed her granddaughter's temple and whispered, "Mine too, sweetheart. Mine too." Later that night, after the guests had gone and the dishes were stacked neatly by the sink, Mary sat by the fire with a quilt over her lap. Sophie had dozed off beside her, curled like a kitten. The crackle of the logs was soothing, the warmth seeping into her bones. She thought of the year past, of ice and hospitals, of betrayal and signatures on deeds. Of microphones and headlines and strangers who had called her brave. Of Daniel, who had walked away one too many times. Her chest ached faintly with the memory of him, but it was not a wound anymore. It was a scar, healed and closed. Mary took a sip of her wine, staring at the firelight dancing on the walls. She smiled, not bitter, not triumphant, but steady. "I didn't lose a son," she whispered into the quiet room. "I gained myself." And this time, the silence that followed was not empty. It was peace. "I didn't lose a son. I gained myself."